people ask me oftentimes, well, how is it that you got to where you are? And a lot of it is just drive. It's tenacity. It's the ability to just get over every single hurdle that gets put in front of you. And if a founder has that ability, and I see that.
Welcome to She Invests. Join us every week for conversations focused on the growing number of female angel investors, the real unicorns. You'll hear from existing female angel investors, VCs, and fund managers on their investment thesis. From deal flow to exits, they will share the best practices that contribute to their success. Female angel investors will be equipped with the tools and resources to confidently activate their capital in order to make an impact in their community and the global economy. With your host, active angel investor and founder of Hera Angels, Dr. Sylvia Ma.
So today for the She Invest podcast, we have a local San Diego investor who I have had the pleasure of being a panelist with, speaker with, just judges with. She's amazing. So Gioia Messinger has an extensive background in connected devices, digital health, and video technologies. She is a founder and CEO of Linked Objects, a technology and business strategy firm specializing in the Internet of Things. Prior to that, she was founder and CEO of Avaak, Inc., a venture-funded company that created VueZone, the award-winning video and cloud service that redefined the home monitoring sector. She is also the chief judge of the Qualcomm Tricorder Xprize, and we will be talking about more stuff about Xprizes later. $10 million competition to bring healthcare to handheld devices. And the Nokia Sensing X Challenge, a competition to transform medical sensors. She is a mentor. She is a lecturer. She serves on screening committees. She is amazing. So thank you for being part of the show, Gioia. Welcome.
Thank you, Sylvia. I'm so glad to be here this morning.
Wonderful. So we're going to dive in right away. I would love to know how you became an investor. What really was that feeling behind it? What was that first invest? Whatever you want to kind of talk about, how was that initial passion towards that?
So years ago, I became an entrepreneur first. I've been basically an entrepreneur all my life, other than a few years right after college that I worked for companies. I became a boss of my own. Through that process, I started kind of understanding how difficult it is to raise money. The first company that I did called MedSmart, which was a medical information systems company that ultimately got sold to Kaiser really early on, but it was an opportunity for me to actually figure out how to do something like that, how to put something together from the beginning to the end. And in that process, I started talking to some angel investors and so forth. We actually didn't have any outside money. We did it all through sweat and our own gut. It gave me the opportunity to, kind of look at that process. Later on, I was the founder and CEO of Avaak, which exited to NETGEAR in 2012. And through that process, I raised venture capital. I raised government funding. I raised venture capital. I understood very, very clearly how difficult it was to raise money from venture. I raised money from venture up in the Bay Area. And here, Qualcomm Ventures was also involved in the company. Subsequently, I started mentoring and I started getting involved with early startups. And that's how I started the process of investing, both in time and in equity.
Love that, because that selling to a bigger firm, getting investment money, you've done it, you've been there, you've been in their same shoes. So that's amazing. I love it whenever that transitions that way and that you can give back in meaningful ways. So and then also walk me through what is your investment thesis? Because you're probably in front of so many awesome ideas. What's kind of your passion behind what you invest in? Or is it different than what you mentor? And I don't know that. So I would love to know that.
My investment thesis really revolves around the founder. Typically, it's folks that I've known for a long time or folks that I truly believe in what they can accomplish. And in some cases, it's, very people that I've known actually. I invested in a startup that I've known the founder, or I knew the founder since he was in elementary school or something like that. and came up with something very cool. And I invested, I was on his advisory board. I became a board member. And in that case, I knew the founder, and I knew that he had, basically the drive to get it done, and also was welcoming in terms of, support from advisors. And, nobody knows as much as they think they know. And if they have the ability to listen, that's always a great thing.
I hear that almost every single podcast is coachability of the founder.
Yeah, but besides coachability, I mean, people ask me oftentimes, well, how is it that, you got to where you are? And a lot of it is just drive. It's tenacity. It's the ability to just, get over every single hurdle that gets put in front of you. And if a founder has that ability, and I see that, but I see it in the context of, hey, this founder has enormous tenacity and has the drive to be able to do this, but at the same time, they understand when they've hit roadblocks and they kind of need to move, right or left or whatever, make adjustments. That's fantastic, right? That's what makes founders enormously successful.
And that idea is also important, like what the market is and all that, but it's more the founder that you think.
Exactly. And the ability to work with people. I mean, there's plenty of founders that are incredibly smart, but at the same time, they just don't have the ability to build a great team. You see that often, and if they don't have the ability to be coachable in that regard, because at the end of the day, it's the founder and the founding team that you invest in, not just the founder, right? But the founder has to be able to extrapolate from there how they're going to build an awesome team.
What is that awesome team? Any examples? You have that one example of a high school, of somebody that you knew from high school, not your high school, but...
if they have that gravitas, that they can pull in people that we as founders or we as CEOs don't know everything about everything. We are, we want to surround ourselves with people that know more than we do. And if a founder has that mentality about, hey, I want to surround myself with the best of the best that know more about me, than me, about pretty much everything that I'm doing in the marketplace or in the technology space or whatever it is that they don't know about, then that's hugely beneficial, right? That happened like in my last company. My former VP of marketing was the VP of marketing worldwide for HP 3-in-1 printers. I mean, fantastically successful marketing person, came to work for a startup that really had nothing. We had little money now, and then we started getting traction. But I mean, he knew about consumer marketing way more than I could possibly have ever absorbed through years and years. Same thing with our VP of sales. He came from Apple. I mean, he had that kind of consumer Apple that is really difficult to get.
Well, you attracted those wonderful individuals. Is anything there about how you attract that great talent as a founder?
You have to be willing, you have to tell a great story that is, a story that can basically attract these type of people and, allow you to have that gravitas. But there's a aspect of authenticity that goes on along with it. You can't just tell a story and pretend, right? I mean, you have to be authentic as the CEO, as the founder around what your vision is. And then you have to be willing to acknowledge that they know more than you do in these areas. That's why you're bringing them on, so that's part of what you would want and what I look for when I look at founders or at founding teams is that, do they complement each other? In this complementary aspect, you're going to have some friction, needless to say, but, these friction points are very beneficial. Mm-hmm. Because you have, opportunity to have different mindsets kind of come together.
And what's been a good, successful team that you've invested in? Can you divulge that information? And, why did you pick those?
It's ebbs and flows, I have to say. It's not like you're going to have that amazing team right off the bat.
That's a good point. Yep.
So I can't pinpoint and say, hey, this company did this and it was fantastic. I actually, in the case of this founding, this very bright founder that I invested in, he was able to attract some very smart people, but they exited early. So it was very, it's hard to say what would have happened after. Mm-hmm. In general, it's all about, understanding the type of people that you need. And as you're kind of entering the market or in the various stages where you're at. So it's not necessarily, the magic formula right off the bat, but understanding the types of ingredients. I always tell founders that kind of building companies is like baking a cake. Of course, this is, if you've never baked a cake, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But, but in order for it to, turn out amazing, it's like, there's certain ingredients that have to go into it. You have to have flour, and you have to measure the appropriate ingredients, and you have to put them in a sequence. It's like, if you forget to do something, the thing flops. And so that's kind of what it is. I mean, there's additional ingredients that have to go on, and there's a sequence and a process that has to be followed.
And that process is, or is it more, do you know that process, or have you seen that process, or is it more of there is a certain process that actually ebbs and flows, as you said, and then that founder, because of their tenacity and their drive and that they are level-headed and focused, they can actually ride that wave?
That's true. I don't think I don't think there is a magic formula to doing this. I do believe very, very heavily in, kind of understanding your customer, very, very quickly and trying to understand. But then again, I mean, oftentimes understanding customers is difficult, right? But doing this customer discovery and understanding the customer is very important. But you have to, I was involved with a company that recently raised an enormous amount of money, and I've been an advisor to the company for many years. But when I walked in there was a scientific team and a CEO. And in that case, it was basically understanding product market fit, but there was no product. There was just a bunch of, technology pieces. And it was my duty and my, as an advisor to the CEO and as a coach to the CEO to kind of try to have them understand that they had to put all this thing together. And it was about, understanding product market fit. What is it? It was technology, like pieces of technology and market fit. Where does the technology intersect the market and the market need? We have to go find that market. And then we had to build a team that kind of was able to kind of create and bring this forward to this market. And that meant, bringing in talent that knew that market, that could deliver the product to that market. So, because all these folks didn't know how to do that. So there's a lot of sequencing that happens once you kind of understand what you're doing, but none of it is a straight line. It's very much, multi-dimensional, multi-vectored approaches to creating companies.
And one thing that I also really value about your experience and your advice is that you kind of understand that trends in technology and trends in what's happening in the marketplace. Because on top of what you just talked about, there are trends in the marketplace that allow for things to like skyrocket or things to stay. How do you feel about that? I know that you know healthcare really well. What are those trends that right now that founders have been able to capture?
Today, I mean, one of the things that we have is we have the ability to communicate with a very affordable device in the back of our pockets or in our purses, right? I mean, that's the bottom line, is that, the ability to have a, what you could be considered a supercomputer in your hand is amazing. And so what you can do with that, it has been phenomenally transformative. What happens on top of that now is that you're moving that ability to communicate to other things, right? Like, so for example, I'm very involved in the Internet of Things because Avaak, my former company, was originally funded by DARPA. That's how we got our, initial quote unquote seed money, if you will. We raised venture capital on top of that, but that's taken a while. And I have to believe that a lot of these technology trends take a really long time to kind of mature and get, cross that chasm, if you will. And so you're seeing a lot of, Internet of Things devices now come through, whether it's in the consumer space or, they're going to be transformative in terms of other types of fields as well. I mean, if you think about agriculture, mining, healthcare, all these very, transportation, all these all these sectors that haven't been transformed in a really long time are going to become completely different by by many pieces. One would be IoT. The other is machine learning, the ability to understand kind of what's going on in context is very important. And then big data and small data. Computationally, can you facilitate analysis, and can you do some predictive analytics? Can you figure out what to plant because of weather changes? There's lots of things that are happening in that space, as well as in healthcare, right? Can you make better healthcare by predicting people's behaviors, by incenting people to do certain things based upon something that they've done before? I don't know. There's lots and lots of discussion around that. And, if you can, and if machine learning ultimately creates robots that humans can interact with, that's going to be enormous, because as population gets older, we're just going to need more and more help. And so many of us are getting older and older. Basically, the curve is in favor of a bunch of these technologies.
But we're young in heart. We're young in heart. One thing I know that sometimes whenever we as investors are looking at the Internet of Things, transformative technology, we talk about the market. Let's say let's pinpoint, let's say transportation, but the transportation industry is not ready for this change. How can you as an investor say, I think I want to invest in this because there is opportunity, but the market's maybe not ready for it? How do you, I don't know if you have experience in that, but I know you have. How do you kind of manage that as an investor? How do you think about that?
Well, I think it's difficult as an investor to think about, long-term trends, right? If you're a seed investor in a long-term trend, you're going to get smashed. Because oftentimes what happens is these type of things take a lot longer than one would presume, and then there are multiple rounds of investment, and you as a seed investor would get, pretty diminished in many situations. That's the case. Of course, if there's an enormous home run, if you're an early investor in, who knows, like Uber or something like that, it didn't matter because you're still going to make a lot of money as an early investor. These types of trends, for example, in the Internet of Things, if you're thinking of it as an investor in a smart city initiative or anything that has, regulatory aspects to it, then you're thinking of it as a long-term, potentially a long-term solution that could have, enormous value creation ultimately, but you would have to be willing to take that enormous risk, because that's something that, there are regulatory aspects that you probably out of everybody's control.
And in that technology space, what are risk mitigation strategies that an investor can take? Yes, we're investing in something that's really seed, but what can we do, or what can we suggest for that founder to do to mitigate that risk?
Well, in the case of, for example, this company that I've been an advisor to for many years that just raised an enormous round, they're in the robotics space, and the question was, hey, could they be in consumer robotics? Can they, and so the answer was, well, there are great trends in IoT and in communications and all these types of technologies that are moving the ability to have these systems kind of come into the consumer world, but they're not ready yet, because what happens is typically in technologies and in situations like this, the consumer is kind of the last adopter. If you think about, what happened with the cell phone and computing devices, they were always used in the military or in commercial efforts. The pricing dynamics are completely different than the consumer. The consumer wants everything basically for nothing or very, very cheap, and it wants it to work perfectly well. Now, we've consumerized a lot of industries. As consumers, everything now, every industry is kind of quote unquote consumerized, because the expectation is there that these things need to be inexpensive and work fantastically. But on the other hand, if you deliver on the value proposition and you, for example, you get rid of a human, a human laborer, and you don't have to pay them $15 an hour or something like that to push a machine. And that person can then go do something of even higher value. Then, the value proposition is very clear, and therefore you can disrupt that before you would be able to disrupt the consumer space. So if the value prop is there, you can create basically a model where you are delivering, enormous cost savings by doing whatever it is that you're doing, and you can demonstrate that. Then, you have a feasible path to success. And that was basically in the context of this robotics company that I worked with here in town. That was, understanding that they could not really go to the consumer space at the moment in time because it would have been cost prohibitive, and instead delivering a value prop into a commercial space where there is enormous gain. And that's really coaching the founder to be able to do that.
And then communicate that gain from the case to the consumer.
Yes. Eventually those technologies will come to the consumer, but not right off the bat. And so if you as an investor are thinking, you're listening to the CEO and you're saying, this CEO is pitching the consumer space, but yet cost-wise, it's not really there. The technology is not quite there for the consumer. You may want to go here first.
That's a great point. And as an investor, I hear you a lot saying, as an advisor, I'm advising them, I'm walking them through that. How is that for you in really advising these technology companies to look at different things? How has that been for you?
That's, what I do on a daily basis nowadays. Besides my EIR role at UCSD, I talking to small and big companies and kind of working with them on, in the case of some very large companies, you asked about transportation. I've been advising a very large, well, quote unquote, transportation. It's an engine company. And, again, in IoT, that's incredibly transformative, right? Before you sold a product, you sold it, and you never had really a dialogue with the customer anymore. But now with IoT and the cloud and the ability to kind of create this continuous dialogue with the customer. And for example, if you're an engine company and you sold engines, that was it. Well, now, if your engine is giving you information on a regular basis, what do you do with that information? You act on it. You can predict various kinds of things. You can say, well, hey, if I'm a truck company and my engine is functioning primarily on the freeway at sea level, that's one engine, and I can predict how long that engine's gonna last, or how often I need to fix it, or bring it in for maintenance. There's so many things that you can do, and these companies now are seeing basically the digital world come at them. They have to transform. So there's a lot of value today in understanding how these basically old economy companies will become, digital economy companies. And that's one humongous aspect of what IoT and machine learning does.
And then those companies also get seed money from investors typically, or is it more like SBIR, STTR, grants? How do they seek that funding? Because it's so transformative. Sometimes it's hard to transform, let's say, that traditional investor.
Yeah. So in the case of like this one that I was talking about, it's an engine company. Well, that company's been around for 100 years, right? So what are they doing? They're looking either to, spin off companies or acquire companies that will, kind of help them in their transformation. So, there's enormous value around that. Being able to deliver, interesting solutions that become part of a new wave of doing business for those folks.
Yeah, so it's more of an acquisition target instead of, let's say, IPO or something like that.
Yeah.
Perfect. And then I also know that one of the things that you really focus in on is healthcare, female health and stuff like that. So I want to dive into the Xprize that you're working on. Can we talk about that and see where that's going?
Yeah, so I've been involved with Xprize in various ways for a few years now. And it started with the Nokia Sensing Xprize, which was really revolutionary in the context of what it would potentially bring to the table. So it was all about sensors, ability to sense various things. And, that was quite successful because there's a company called Alstone in the UK that has created a breath sensor that can, diagnose all sorts of really interesting things just out of your breath. We had really amazing sensors in that, and Nokia gave about 2.5 million or 3 million, I can't remember, as part of the prize. Then I was involved with the Qualcomm Tricorder Xprize, which was a $10 million competition to bring healthcare to the palms of consumers. That was really focused on diagnosing many, many conditions, 13 conditions, at the palm of your hand, basically, have consumers be able to diagnose at home. I recently was asked to join another Xprize, which is called the Women's Safety Prize. And it's quite interesting that we're having this dialogue right now in the nation and the world about women's safety. And it's really all about creating applications and devices, wearable devices or whatever, for women to keep safe or to feel safe. And the amount of it is unbelievably astonishing how many women across the world or around the world are sexually abused and just have no recourse as to what to do. The statistics are just incredible. They're phenomenal. You would not believe it, right? I mean, in Delhi, 90% of women get harassed. I mean, you think about it, it's mind-boggling.
Exactly.
In this country, it's 1 in 5, but that's 1 in 5 that actually report.
Exactly.
I mean, as we are seeing, it's highly likely that that is at least 2 or more X times. So
Exactly.
Naveed and his wife Anu Jain, who were the founders of InfoSpace, have created a $1 million prize. It's an across the world prize, and we have 21 teams from various countries participating in creating this this device. And come April or May of next year, we're going to be announcing the winner.
That's wonderful. So we have 20. How many teams did we have across the globe?
Well, I think it started with about 80, but now we're down to 21.
Wonderful. And that will transform women's lives.
That's the hope. I mean, the hope is that, the device has to be less than $40. I mean, there's like all these feature sets that they have to, the device or application has to provide and so forth. So the idea is that we need to create something that is really, really inexpensive, because a lot of these abuse cases are happening in rural areas, where people don't have that much money to buy something like this.
So that diversity of thought is one thing that I just went right into when you mentioned this, is that, these devices that can be globally bought, how are they going to transform a woman's life if she is in the rural area? It's very different to be sexually assaulted in another part of the world than the United States. How are you guys leveling that out?
Balancing that out. Yeah, I think that's really complicated. And the way the prize was constructed was that, there have to be some form of cellular coverage, because that's the idea. And if you think about it, I was listening to a talk yesterday. There's 8 billion cellular devices across the world now, and I think 20% of the very, very poor population has cell phones. And I was in Africa a few years ago, and I was amazed at the coverage that I was getting in the middle of absolutely nowhere, and how many people were actually going from, these mud huts in, very, very remote villages, going to like larger villages to get their phone recharged or to, pay for some service or whatever. And, they're like living in misery, but they still have cell coverage. Amazing.
Yeah, I know that there's a transformative thing in Africa that, a cell phone will allow a woman to be able to have a bank account and be able to do some sort of transactions through a bank account. Even that simple solution has enabled women to actually, come out of poverty or come out of horrible situations.
Absolutely. And that's what this whole thing is about, right? It's about ensuring that it's the cost is minimal. It's not necessarily just telling the police that
Yes.
something happened, but it's telling, it's about creating a network of kind of, if you will, angels or folks that can rescue you at the moment that it's happening. That doesn't necessarily have to be a governmental agency or entity, right? It could be your father, it could be your aunt, it could be anybody that is, in that custodial network, if you will. And so there's lots of good ideas that we've seen that, could hopefully become transformative in this space, because it's just absolutely astounding what's happening.
Well, I'm glad that there is something that's coming out of it, and there are devices that will be transformative for women, and you're involved with that. So thank you so much. That's amazing.
It's so cool. I'm really, I'm thrilled.
That's wonderful. So anything else that you're kind of working on right here in San Diego? We're going to come back to San Diego, going global, not coming back to San Diego. That is something that you're really passionate about. I know the technology is really important to you. Healthcare is very important to you. Anything else that's kind of come up in the last couple of years?
I've been an EIR at UC San Diego, transfer appointed, and I really enjoyed, my stint at UCSD. It's where I went to school, so I'm happy that I'm able to give back. And I'm involved there. I was, myself and Barbara Bree were the first mentors for myStartupXX. And in that context, we had a very, I think a very, very nice run now with myStartupXX, where it started with, we're begging women, young women to come in and, pitch to us and help us create this, a network of founders in the university that were women. But unfortunately, the first year, it was like there were only 2 or 3. And
I remember that.
And now we have many. We had hundreds of applicants now in this past round. So I'm very passionate about myStartupXX on campus and supporting that as much as possible in many ways, both through Athena and through my just my own, advice and being on campus and having the opportunity to talk with students about their projects has been really fun.
I think that let's tease that apart a little, because I know all the things that you're talking about, but our listeners, there might be an angel investor who's in Illinois or something like that, and there's a university close to her. myStartupXX is a business accelerator for female entrepreneurs or female technologists in a university to actually commercialize their technologies. So let's tease that apart. myStartupXX, how did you get involved as an investor into this, and what was your role there?
myStartupXX essentially a collaboration is an accelerator, female accelerator at UC San Diego. That came as a collaboration between the School of Engineering and the School of Management. And at the time, there were 2 women that were running the accelerators in these 2 different areas of campus. And they went to see a movie about how Facebook was started. And they came out of that movie saying, hey, why don't we do something like that on campus? Why don't we figure out a way for women to get together and to have a place where groups of women can create companies? Because this was an easy thing for groups of guys in a frat at Harvard to do this, but it's not so easy for groups of women to do this. So they had kind of the vision. Rosabelle Ochoa and Lara Rashtakovic had this vision of doing this at UC San Diego. And I happen to be a mentor at the von Liebig Center at UCSD, which was housed at the School of Engineering. So Rosabelle asked me if I could, become a mentor with myStartupXX, and right when they were putting it together. So that's how I became a mentor. One of the first, there were only a few women that had come at that point to the first meeting. And we had, an amazing group of 3 women and 2 great mentors.
Hey, it
Yeah,
starts small, but it's great.
and then through drive and tenacity and so forth, Rosabelle and Lada pushed this forward, and then essentially now it's housed at the School of Management, and then there's another woman in town, Kim Davis, that with Lada kind of runs myStartupXX now in a pretty rigorous accelerator manner. As an investor, I have the ability to go talk to every single one of these teams, get to know the founders, get to understand the founding team, and kind of look at them through a progression of several months or years, if you will, because then you start seeing the drive and tenacity through that.
I love that. And that myStartupXX also was funded by the SBA. So really great way of a local university, putting out that call to action, mentors like you, investors coming together saying, I want to be involved with this. And then after a couple of years, then the federal government saying, this is a great metrics, great organization, great concept. Let's fund it some more. So I know the whole progression of that. That's why it's easy for me to talk about it, but it's a great organization. And that's something that an investor can get involved with. And then so let's back up a little bit about Entrepreneur in Residence also is part of another program at the university. And that's typical to a lot of universities is to have an entrepreneur in residence like yourself that gives back. So do you want to talk a little bit more about that and how your role is there as an investor?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that the chancellor was clear about was, they wanted, number one, they wanted to pull technologies out of UCSD and see, the UCSD has one of the largest amounts of grant money that comes from the federal government to any university in the country. I think they're third or something like that. More than $1 billion a year comes to UC San Diego for research. And very little actually kind of like gets translated and commercialized. So, part of the effort here was, can you commercialize more technology? But beyond that, it was about creating a startup and entrepreneur ecosystem in San Diego. I mean, the chancellor is very, he came from Carnegie Mellon. He has a large vision about job creation in San Diego and the ability to do that through, a founding and entrepreneurial ecosystem. And so part of it was, hey, even if these mentors don't create jobs, maybe they can mentor, or these EIRs don't necessarily create new companies out of UCSD technology. It's like, can they mentor great companies so that those companies can become even greater and employ a lot of people? So those Wonderful. Were the 2 things that I've been involved with. And I've seen literally almost 100 or more companies out of UC San Diego, start up as an idea and then kind of flourish. And some of them now have gone to another startup accelerator in San Diego, the EvoNexus incubator, if you will.
I love how you brought that up because that's very important for any angel investors. I mean, you're kind of like the walking poster person about this, is that become integrated into the entrepreneurial ecosystem in your city. You did it a lot with UCSD as an alumni. So, look at your alumni, look at the universities that you come from and say, how do I give back? But then also giving back to that larger ecosystem as an investor, especially as a female angel investor, to be able to be in that room so that when that entrepreneur comes to pitch, you're in front of her saying, I am you. Talk to me. I am good. I will support you. I will talk to you about your technology.
Absolutely. Like, for example, I'm involved with Founder Institute, and I saw a very early company in LA that has become incredibly successful. And I was basically one of the first people that had even met the founder. Being part of the ecosystem is hugely important.
That is amazing. And you do such a great job of it. So I know that we're almost run out of time. I want to have like another hour with you, but I can't. So, wanted to thank you and also end with a rapid final 4 questions that we ask everybody. What is your favorite angel investing resource?
AngelList is good. It's more broad and wider, but it's well known, and there's a lot of good companies there. Of course, networking is another thing. I mean, networking in your ecosystem, whatever we were just talking about, both through universities and your local universities, it's phenomenal what happens in universities.
Yeah, the technologies are awesome, and also a supportive environment as well at a university. Yep. And then number 2 is, what's your favorite book? It can be professional or that you like a book in general.
I'm currently reading the Hillary Clinton book because I think it's important. However, whatever you think of her, it doesn't matter. But I think it's important. It's not my favorite book, but it is a book that I think a lot of people need to read. I think a book that has done some good, but also has had some controversy is Lean In. I think the Sheryl Sandberg book is important for women in general to read. You may agree or disagree with a lot of the stuff that she's saying, but it's full of, anecdotes and really full of very, very, well-sourced information. And whatever you think of her, there's plenty of great sources of information in that book that I think people need to pay attention to.
I think I highlighted so much in the glossary and appendix of that book.
Exactly.
I'm like, oh, this research, and oh my gosh, I didn't know about this. I loved that. That was like one of my favorite pieces of the book.
I agree. I mean, look, you can say, hey, this woman, whatever, but that's not the point. I mean, the point is there's just so much great sourcing, and statistically speaking, it's another thing that's mind-boggling. So.
Yeah.
There you go.
I love it. So number 3, who has been a major influence in your life?
My mom and dad, for sure. My parents. My dad passed away when I was young, but was an enormous influence. And my mom kind of proceeded on to basically tell me what he was telling me, which was you can do anything you want, and you'll be whatever you want to be. Just go do it. Go for it.
Exactly. Yeah. Love that. That's what we need in our lives.
Absolutely. And here in San Diego, I've had really great supportive people as well. I mean, Ken Olson, who was, early on working with Connect, and he was the CEO of Proxima, has been a great supporter of me and a great mentor. And, he's also an investor in the community. And I've had other, male and female mentors that have been fantastic. So I really appreciate that.
That's awesome. And the last one is, what does abundance mindset mean to you?
Being able to give back. I mean, it's, there's Peter Diamandis, who's the CEO or not the former CEO of Xprize, wrote a book about abundance. And it's really all about, we in the Western world have just basically so much to give back. We've reached an element in our lives or a point in our lives that we just don't comprehend what it's all about. For me, at least, it's approaching a place where you can definitely just kind of give as much as you can.
Exactly. I love that. So thank you, Gioia, so much for being part of this. It's been awesome. I love diving in the technology and into the ecosystem that we both live in and breathe in. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
It's been a pleasure. Good to see you.
I had the pleasure of having Gioia Messinger on the She Invest podcast, and she is a force in the San Diego innovation ecosystem. As a former amazing entrepreneur in technology and a girl in tech, she was able to walk us through the awesome trends in technology that are going on right now, especially around the Internet of Things. We talked about her investment thesis, which focuses around the founder, the drive, the tenacity, and being able to work with people and build a great team. But then we also dived into how she gives back. She gives back in multiple of different ways with her ecosystem, especially around the university setting. She is an entrepreneur in residence at the University of California, San Diego, and has been intricately involved in the launch and growth of myStartupXX, which is a business accelerator for female technologists in the university. So as an angel investor, give back
to not only the entrepreneurial ecosystem in general of your location, but Gioia has really been able to give back in a very meaningful way to the university and starting off technologies on the right path. And I love how she ended up the podcast in that the abundance mindset to her is to about giving back as a collective and being able to give back in a way that you bring your assets to the table so that others can thrive. And she is now also working on the Xprize for women's safety. And these devices will transform the way women are treated and the way that women can rise up against the insecurities of this world. So it was a pleasure having Gioia on the podcast. And I think that you will enjoy that podcast as much as I had the pleasure of having that conversation with her.
Thank you for listening to and subscribing to the She Invest podcast. Go on over to sheinvest.com for the full show notes for this episode, as well as any resources, websites, and opportunities mentioned during the show. Sign up for the sheinvest.com newsletter to learn about events like our annual Hera Venture Summit during the month of September and our She Invests monthly investor circles. Thank you for your time, talent, and treasure.